I know I've been gone for a couple of weeks, but I've been busy. I've been working my regular job and I recorded 2 audiobooks. I recorded 16 finished hours of audio, 2 different books. It should be released in the next couple of weeks. I'll let you know when they come up. Before we get into this podcast, I would be remiss if I didn't let you know that Yeti Bars is running a month-long 10% discount on everything across the board. If you use the code DC10 at checkout, you get another 10% off, so 20% off of everything. By the way, I bought some of their desert salve the other day. It is really some good moisturizer, some good lotion. My legs get a little ashy this time of year, and my elbows do too. And so that salve really moistens my legs and my elbows up. Go check out Yeti Bars at yetibars.net and Yeti Bars on Facebook. Use the code DC10 at checkout. Get an extra 10% off along with their November sale of 10% off. You got you a bargain there. And if you order over $75 worth of stuff, shipping is free. yetibars.net and Yeti Bars on Facebook. All right, let's jump into this video. I got 4 stories, 3 good Bigfoot stories and 1 kind of possible Bigfoot mystery at the end, but all 4 of these are awesome. I know you're going to like it. Let's get rolling. All right, here we go. Here is an email from Charles. He says for me to use his whole name, but because he stands by what he wrote. But I just don't give last names out, and I hope you all don't mind that. You know, that's not important really, but anyway, this is a great story. It's really good, and I hope you enjoy the time he put into writing this, because it's like I said, it's a good story. I grew up in rural Alabama in the small town of Northport. Now I say town, but that may be stretching it. It was 14 miles from my childhood home to the closest red light. Tuscaloosa was a major city, and Northport was a stepchild. In 1978, there was not a lot to do on rural Highway 69 North. The summers were hot, but the fall brought on every young man's dream of hunting the big buck that ate all the peas during the last growing season. My job at 12 was the defender of my grandmother's garden. I had a carte blanche on any night to eliminate any deer we caught raiding the pea patch, regardless of what hunting season it was. And God help the game warden who dared question my Pentecostal grandmother on her war on deer or any other 4-legged creature who ate what she sweated to grow. I became exceptional with a firearm, having spent a lot of time practicing at 200 and 300 yards with my rifle my grandfather bought me for Christmas when I was 8. I preferred a shotgun, though, due to the massive undergrowth in the woods surrounding our land. So in 1978, when the deer had ravaged my grandmother's peas so badly, she made it clear to me to put my skills to good use or face dire consequences. Back then, I had none of the fancy stuff that you see now. I had no camo, no tree stand, no deer urine to bait 'em in. It was just me and a pair of quiet sneakers, my rifle, and my best friend to help me. Together, we weighed our options for where best to funnel the deer in. We decided on a place about 3 miles from my grandparents' farm, where we'd have the best chance to see them along a well-worn trail that extended into the woods for at least 8 miles. It passed by a small pond that no one ever visited but us. The woods were all pines along the roadside, but deeper in they transitioned back to oak and black gum. My pine was cut periodically, but the hardwood has stood for 120 years or more. Some of those trees are 5 feet at the base and well over 100 feet tall. We got started early for us on a cool Saturday morning in September. Bama was playing later, so we wanted to be back in time to see the game. We lit out for the hardwoods down by the creek. We planned on taking the long way, but after about an hour of walking, my best friend wasn't so keen on wasting his Saturday helping me have a place to sleep and eat. We stopped where we were and decided to hunt from a makeshift blind that we threw together on the spot. It wasn't much more than a couple of limbs and some well-placed leaves, but it gave us some concealment. It also gave us a great view of the 40-acre valley below us. We were perched along an old game trail high up on a natural ledge about 200 feet above. We sat there 4 feet apart with our rifles, something to drink, and a lot of ammo for what seemed like hours. We traded off taking naps, but our butts were getting sore and our legs were starting to fall asleep. We were serious about our mission, but I wasn't any happier about spending my Saturday out there than my friend was. At 11 that morning, I saw something moving in the valley at my 1 o'clock. It was just a brownish blur, 400 yards out and 200 feet below me. I tapped my friend and pointed it out. He gave me the thumbs up and trained a scope on it. Before I could lift my rifle, 20 coyotes came racing out of that same direction with their tails between their legs. They weren't chasing anything, and they weren't fighting. They were in a full-out run for their lives. I could think of only one thing in those woods that would cause this behavior, and I wanted no part of it. Years earlier, my grandfather and some neighbors had hunted a 200-pound mountain lion that laid waste to some pretty vicious dogs they sent after it. Several had shot at it, but no one got it. And now, a 12-year-old boy and his buddy were going toe-to-toe with it? No thanks. I didn't want to run. I had visions of catching this thing out in the open and dropping it once and for all. I'd be famous. I guess I could have mounted it and been the big hunter for a while. My buddy tapped my arm and said, "You see that oak at the break in the pines by that old dead stump? Look through your scope just above it." The whole time I was straining to find it, I was steadying myself to take a shot. Finally, I zeroed in on it, but it wasn't a big cat. It had a face. 300 yards from us was something between an ape and a human that looked like he'd been pumping iron on steroids. He was down in the push-up position, and he was staring back at me. I could see his eyes plain as day, and his lip would curl up, and he sniffed the air. Yeah, he sniffed the air. He was trying to wind us like a hound dog will do. Definitely, he went from prone to squatting, and he moved unbelievably fast. I don't think he realized I had spotted him yet. He was still trying to remain covert. My buddy's feet started trying to run, but his brain hadn't caught up with him yet. I was trying to keep him from running and trying to explain that we weren't going to outrun that thing. All the while, that pack of coyotes was bearing down on us. They were less than 100 yards away, and I had no idea how they were going to take to discovering us there. Meanwhile, I made a fatal error no hunter should ever make. I had taken my eyes off the hairy thing by the stump. To give my friend his due, he didn't cry or scream, but a slight panic over whether to choose to fight or flight had definitely set in. I just wanted to get out of there without running into whatever that thing was. Seconds passed and the coyotes came running straight at us like I knew they would. But my only thought was that thing below and where it was now. I have cherished every day of my life since that moment. That was the day that I could have died, and it would have been no one's fault but my own because of the many arrows that followed. We ran. We picked flight over fight. The chase was on. We were 2.5 miles from the house and 1.75 miles to earshot of people working on our farm. It began in a frenzy fueled by youth and farm living. The hard work that we put in every day helped our strength and stamina. I assumed if we turned into an area of dense timber that we could outmaneuver it. I was wrong. For the next mile, we played a guessing game of which damn side of us it was going to be on. We heard footfalls on either side, and I convinced myself it was my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I knew there was a small gully coming up that ran for about 100 yards or so. It was about 10 feet deep and 20 feet wide in places. I made up my mind that I was going to do my best impression of Custer's last stand right there. We hit the wash with me in the lead, thinking that we would get to the other end where there was one hell of a 12-foot climb out. We could get back up to the top, and we'd equal the odds on size. And then, with that thing in the wash below, we'd fill it full of holes from the safety above. We reached the end, but it was so muddy and slimy there was no way we were coming out that way, and I turned and searched for a spot where I could grab some roots and climb out. I found it and made a quick work of getting out of there, and then I grabbed my buddy and helped him up. We were exhausted and breathless, and we sat there for a moment thinking we'd gotten away. And then suddenly I looked up, and there it was, less than 60 yards from us. It had been pacing us the whole time. That was the first real, honest-to-God look I got at this creature. He was 7 feet tall and weighed 400 pounds, and he was pure, lean muscle. You could plow a lot of corn with a mule built like that. He had a metallic smell of old blood mixed with rotten meat. He was breathing slow and with a purpose, and there he stood for us to see. Was he an ape, a man, or was it a Bigfoot? I had no clue, and I knew nothing about Bigfoot at that time. He had a thick brow, but his nose was skinnier than a Neanderthal. His hands were huge, and his breastbone was thick. Large joints connected his limbs, and the muscles at the top of his legs stood out. His lats and pecs were well defined, and he was covered in coarse hair that reflected light like an old hound's fur will sometimes. And the mouth didn't fit the creature whatsoever. It protruded because of the teeth, giving the impression that it came out a few inches more than it should have. We were taking all this in when something in the back of my mind told me that he wanted us to focus on him. Footfalls were coming from somewhere behind us, and it broke through the dumbfounded trance that we were in. We heard limbs breaking too close to us, and I turned to get a glimpse of his buddy doing his best to hide behind a tree 100 yards from us. He was smaller and had a lighter coat, but beyond that I couldn't say. I had enough of being chased. I decided that people were going to know which one of these things ate me, because he'd be the one bleeding the most. "Put all your bullets into him," was all I whispered to my friend. While I fired on Johnny-come-lately behind us, my friend opened up on the big one. I laid down a line of fire that knocked huge chunks out of the tree that he was hiding behind, and then I turned and fired on the big one too. He was running back down the wash. "It's time to go," I shouted, and we did a 100-yard swap out, run, cover. We'd stop every so often to listen and catch our breath, and then we'd go right back to it until we had the big barn in sight. We hit the long gravel road and walked from there, and we decided before we got to the house that this was a story that we'd never tell anyone, not if we had any hope of ever deer hunting again. For months we didn't go back out there, and every time we looked in that direction, we would decide to play football or something, anything but go into those woods. I managed to put it all in the back of my mind, and as the years have passed, I haven't given it much thought, mainly because I no longer go in the woods. So there I was 18 months ago, and I was sitting in my yard waiting for my dog to go to the bathroom in my neighbor's yard at 12:30 in the morning, when a fear I haven't known in years ran up my spine. I live across from a 3,000-acre protected wilderness area. I recognized immediately that I was being stalked, I was being hunted, and their eyes were on me, watching my every move. I walked back inside and got my pistol, and I came out and pissed on my mailbox post, all the while shouting at the woods, "I've been running for 43 years, and I ain't gonna do it no more." Make no mistake, these things mean you harm. I do not subscribe to the theory that they are harmless, because they are not. Charles, that might be one of the coolest stories I've ever heard. North Alabama. What town did you say you were in? North of, no, you live in Northport. and I guess that's close to Tuscaloosa. That's a terrifying story. I don't really know what to say about it. I think you marking your mailbox post, that was probably a good move. I don't know if I'd think to do that. That's a good idea. Charles, I love that story. I appreciate you sending it. You're a good writer, good storyteller. Everybody's a good storyteller when they're relating their own story. Y'all know that, don't you? These stories are so good is because I think a lot of them are true. And I really do believe this one. This guy's dead serious. He remembers everything about it from when he was a kid. All right, let's go to the last story. Thank you, Charles, for the story. I really appreciate it. Here is an email from Dean, and this is about a skunk ape. It's kind of short, but this is really good. Sometime between 1999 and 2001, I was hunting on a wildlife management area in central Florida. It was archery and muzzleloader hunting for deer only and wild hog. I was hunting alone, but I've never minded that. I was a shift worker at the time and enjoyed the solitude. And until that trip in September, I had never had a bad experience in the woods. I had built and placed a 12-foot conduit tree stand in a new area on the south side of the lake days prior to hunting the new location. I was using a compound bow and I could shoot roughly 60 to 70 yards. I had a sweet spot attached to a pine tree on the edge of a pine plat bordering a small oak hammock and myrtle trees that acted as a natural hedge of camouflage. Around 2 p.m., I parked my truck about a mile from the stand and walked in for an evening hunt. Soon after settling in, I heard some concerning sounds. Coming from my left near the myrtle trees about 10 to 15 feet high, I could hear growling and a very deep breathing. I had first thought it was an alligator because the paper map I was using indicated that it was near a lake, even though I couldn't see the lake. At that point, the sounds were loud enough that I figured my hunt was over, so I decided to mimic the sounds. I was answered by a deep, raspy growling that I could feel as much as I could hear. Surprisingly, it got quiet for the next several minutes. I was sure they were coming from the woods, so I started looking intently in that direction, trying to find and identify the source. I was getting pretty concerned about the growls when 2 deer meandered through some brush about 100 yards off to my left. They didn't seem alarmed or panicked in any way, as if they hadn't heard the sounds just a few minutes ago. As they calmly moved toward the myrtle trees to my left and coming within range of a clean shot, I slowly began to knock an arrow on the bow and position myself to take the shot. I was there to hunt, not identify strange sounds. The first deer had just come into full view, and one of the 2-foot palmetto bushes and tall grass when all hell broke loose. There was an enormous, loud crack like a wooden branch hitting another object, and then wrestling ensued in the brush just beyond my line of sight. The second deer turned and ran in the direction it had come, blowing and jumping over brush as it hightailed it out of there. I watched it for a minute before turning my focus back to the location of the attack. Something sounded like bones breaking, followed by dragging, and then everything got quiet. My heart was pounding hard as the realization of what had just happened dawned on me. A predator had taken down a deer, but what kind of predator was it? It occurred to me that whatever it was preoccupied, and I needed to take advantage of that. I loaded up my backpack and bow, and I climbed down as quietly as I could without taking my eyes off the spot where it all had happened. Now I hit the ground as gently as I could and hauled my butt back to my truck at a dead sprint. I never got a look at the predator, but I know it took down the deer. It did so all while going undetected by both the deer and me. I didn't have a cell phone back then or a GPS. I hadn't even bothered to tell anyone my plans for the day or where I would be hunting. No one would have known where to look if it had chosen me instead of that deer. What happened that day scared the hell out of me, and it left me wondering for years. Today, I don't go hunting alone. I have my phone with GPS activated, and I always carry at least a sidearm every time I enter the woods. I'm 50 years old now, a lot wiser and more educated, and I know there are apex predators in the woods, and it's best to be prepared. Dean, I agree with you. It's best to be prepared if you're hunting down in Florida and there's alligators and possibly other predators in the woods. I think you got pigs down there, all kind of stuff. But that was such an interesting story. I mean, I don't think I've gotten one like this where someone actually, you didn't actually witness it, but you knew it was going on, that this thing grabbed a deer and killed it and then walked off with it. You never saw a thing. You just heard it all go down. It was kind of confirmed by the sounds you were hearing before the deer came in. I think that's cool. You know, Kerry Arnold and his bunch have been down in Florida, and they've got all kind of footage of different things in Florida. Those swamps down there apparently are enough habitat to hold a lot of these things. And the whole subject of the skunk ape is fascinating to me. And I enjoy reading up on it, and I can't wait for Kerry's documentary to come out. It's going to be really good. So anyway, I'm just rambling. Dude, I appreciate you sending it, Dean. You're a good writer, and it was a great story, and we all enjoyed it. Thank you, man. Let's take a little break here. What you're seeing on the screen is an image of a watercolor that was done by Denise Snyder. Denise is an artist. She lives in Illinois, I believe. She actually did a print of my dog Chunk, who died back in June. I had it on my wall and I took it down because every time I look at it, it just breaks my heart. I've also got a cast of his paw that the vet took before they sent him off to the crematorium. We had him cremated, and I can't even look at that. I'm just having a hard time looking at stuff that belonged to Chunk. I don't know how long that's going to last. Maybe I don't know. You never know how long that's going to last. But as long as I'm not looking at his collar or his leash or, some image of him, even a picture off my phone, I just get choked up. It's really weird. But anyway, Denise did this print of Chunk, and it is beautiful. And this print you're seeing here, this watercolor is of a dog. These are actual images of dogs that have passed on or are living that people have commissioned her to do. I'm going to put a link to her Facebook page in the description. She did me a favor. I'm doing her a favor back and just kind of putting her name out there. If you have a dog that you want an image done of that's really done very professionally, would be a very sentimental item, keepsake to keep, send her an image or a couple of images of your dog so she can see everything. Let her quote you a price on the commission to do a painting of your dog. She does a great job, and they look exactly like your dog. So I thought I'd let you know that. All right, let's get back into the stories. Appreciate you guys bearing with me. All right, this man didn't say whether I could use his name or not, so I kind of prefer not to. I'll give you his first name. It's Greg. He writes, I grew up in the Bronx. To me, Bigfoot was just a legend, a myth, a fun thing to think about. Despite growing up in the Bronx, I always felt like a country boy at heart. So when I got older and married, I bought a 2-acre lot, about a third of which is wooded, and it backs up to the Appalachian Trail. A year after we moved in, I hired an excavator to clear out a little bit in the back so we could put in a pool. While he was there, I also had him carve a little dirt track through the piles of dead and downed trees to make a motorcycle track for my son. A few days after the guy finished work, I decided to walk back there and survey the new trail. To my surprise, I found several structures built out of cedar trees, some of which went over the trails, forming tunnels. There were also platforms built 20 feet up in the trees. These things were built much better than I could have ever done. That's assuming I could have budged one of those big logs. They were all the way too heavy for any human to move or set in position. And every now and then I walk back there and I see that changes have been made. Sometimes at night I'd hear strange noises and screams and shrieks. I couldn't identify them. They didn't sound like coyotes and they didn't sound like foxes, but they did sound eerie. I didn't immediately think Bigfoot when I heard them. I just knew they were noises I didn't have an explanation for. However, looking back between the strange structures and odd sounds, my thoughts may have been leaning toward believing at that point. There was a giant oak back there that was probably 4 feet in diameter. The base of this tree sloped out in a way that formed a perfect backrest. I've spent years under that tree hunting turkey and deer. Several years ago, I was sitting there in my favorite spot with my turkey call, mimicking a hen, when I suddenly heard leaves crunching behind me. Something was approaching and it sounded huge. It was way too big to be a big old tom. I was trying to identify it when it stopped walking, and I froze to my spot when I realized it had come to a stop right behind me. It felt like I sat there for an eternity waiting for whatever it was to pass behind me. After a minute or two, I was hit by a putrid smell that immediately sent me back to the time my mom took me to the Bronx Zoo when I was a kid. I'd gone inside the ape house and the smell there was so bad I felt like I was going to pass out. Until that moment, it was the worst smell I had ever experienced in my life. What I was smelling now, 5 decades later, was every bit as bad. Until the moment I smelled that stench and instantly related it to the smell of the zoo, I had never consciously considered that it might be Bigfoot. Now I was terrified knowing it might be a Bigfoot standing behind me. It would be nothing for him to reach around the tree and grab me. After a few more minutes, the wet dog covered in gorilla poop. Oh, here we go with the smell description. After a few more minutes, the wet dog covered in gorilla poop and dipped in skunk spray smell began to dissipate. I began to relax a little and slowly stood up. With my 12-gauge Remington 1100 at the ready, I leaned out to see what was standing there. There was nothing. Whatever had been standing behind me had disappeared, along with its smell. No leaves crunching, no shuffling, nothing. I never got a look at it, but the way the leaves were disturbed, I'm pretty sure it was huge. This all took place about 15 years ago in New York, an hour and a half north of Manhattan. I never gave it much thought after it happened. I never told anyone the story because I could never bring myself to believe in Bigfoot. I used to joke with my friends that Bigfoot was lurking in my backyard, but that was as far as it would go. And then, this past summer, I was riding my bike through the magnificent northern Catskill Mountains of New York about 2 hours north of my house. It was a beautiful, windless day with spectacular views that stretched for miles. I have no idea where I was because I prefer to go where the back roads take me. I came out over the crest of a mountain to the site of a long, straight, narrow road stretching out in front of me. I could see a house sitting by itself with a big tree in the front yard that sat about 75 feet off the road. It looked like the tree was shaking frantically. And when I got closer, I saw what appeared to be an enormous, pregnant orangutan sitting under it, stuffing her face with apples. There was some kind of doodle dog with her, and it ran over to me and then back to the orangutan. Apparently, they were friends. I had stopped my bike and was watching this creature who was periodically glancing back at me, but she didn't seem threatening at all. I kept my hand on the throttle just in case. The dog was running back and forth between us, and Miss Bigfoot crawled around and gathered up more apples. She must have decided that she needed more of a selection because she stood up and grabbed a branch that must have been 10 feet off the ground and she shook it. I noticed her posture was much more upright than that of an orangutan, more like a Bigfoot. She had big, powerful legs and was covered in orange-red hair except for her face, which was a lot less hairy. I tried to communicate with her by saying things like, "Hey, Mama," "Hi, Mama," but all she did was give me an inquisitive look and then glanced away. It was like she was used to seeing people and having people see her. And then she bent down and picked up a few apples and started rolling them toward me. When she stood up again, I noticed her head was about 2 feet below that 10-foot branch. She took a few steps toward me, and that was my cue to leave. I politely said goodbye, and I waved and quickly left. A few miles down the road, I had to pull over and calm myself down. My phone was in my bike bag, and I could have taken some pretty spectacular photos, but I was too scared to get off the bike and do that. After another 5 miles down the road, I pulled in to a little gas station. The person behind the counter said, "You look like you just saw a ghost." "Well, actually, you wouldn't believe what I just saw," I answered. "So you saw Daryl," said the woman with a knowing grin. "Who is Daryl?" I asked. "Well, that's our local Bigfoot," she said, like it was a normal sight in these parts. "But keep it under your hat," she added. "Well, that won't be a problem," I assured her, as I thought to myself, evidently they don't know Daryl is a girl. "Oh, man, great story, Greg. I really appreciate that. New York, who would have ever thought that Bigfoot was 2 hours north of New York? But I guess if you get out of the city, you start getting into the rural area pretty quick." I kind of got a chuckle out of you with the description of the way the thing smelled, and also when you were going, "Hey mama, hey mama, hey mama." I don't know, sound like you were doing some cat calling towards her. But that's really cool, man. I'm glad you got to see that, and we all really appreciate the story, so thanks a lot, Greg. This is a story I got in an email from Gerald Gustafson. I've done 2 or 3 of his stories on the What If It's True podcast. This story is quite possibly a Bigfoot mystery, and I thought it was appropriate to put it on Dixiecryptid. Gerald is a good writer, and I love his stories, and I hope you enjoy it too. I'm going to share it with you right now. It's really good. Title of the story is Ore Lake Road, and he says it's true. On the west edge of the small town of 5 Lakes lies Ore Lake Road. It is a narrow, rutty, twisted lane that runs between Small and Waverly Roads. On one side, the land is heavily forested and rises higher than the church steeple, and on the other side, the land slopes down to Ore Lake, a large, dank, lily-covered wetland. Beyond, on both sides, the land is wooded, dark, and as silent as a grave. They say it always feels cold on Ore Lake Road, even on the hottest days. Some say the road is haunted, that a wild man, a creature, or even a witch lives in the forest. The first person to notice something strange on Ore Lake Road was young Master John Rumley, scion of the richest family in 5 Lakes. One day, as Rumley later told the tale, he was riding down the road when halfway through he saw an old withered woman sitting on a stump paring an apple. He didn't recognize her as anyone he knew, so he dismounted to address her. Once he was on the ground, the woman had vanished, stump and all. After that, there were disappearances, at least 3 known to the people in 5 Lakes. People traveling alone down Ore Lake Road who went onto the lane and never came out. Legend, of course, added another 2. On Waverly Road, there was a small country store called Miller's Market. Mr. Miller owned this old-time general store and had for many years. He was a respected man in 5 Lakes. He didn't believe the Ore Lake stories, though he did acknowledge that, yes, over the years there had been some disappearances in the area, and that what they all seemed to have in common were people traveling on Ore Lake Road. Mr. Miller had a daughter named Mary. His wife had died some years before, and Mary was very dear to her father. Like her mother, she had rich, thick hair dark as coal, eyes a gem-like blue, and lips red as summer berries. She was a lively, dutiful girl and a renowned 16-year-old beauty. Many people would stop at Miller's Market just to see Mary, maybe buy a Coke or a sandwich as an excuse to pause a while and talk with her. One of the people was a big, husky young man named Daniel Martin. Dan would stop every day after work to spend time with Mary, And one day Mr. Miller asked Mary about the braid in her hair, and she told him it was what they called a love knot. On the other end of Ore Lake Road was Small Road, and the last house on Small Road was owned by the Wilmus family. As it happened that winter, the Wilmus baby took sick. Dr. Kepler went out there to find the infant to be very sick indeed, so he phoned in a prescription to be delivered immediately. The delivery boy from the pharmacy in Five Lakes went out on Waverly Road and stopped at Miller's Market. When he learned from Mr. Miller that he would have to take Ore Lake Road to reach the Wilma's place on Small Road, he declared that he was afraid and he wouldn't do it. "It's your job and your duty," Mr. Miller told him, but the boy said no. He wouldn't travel on Ore Lake Road. Had they never heard the rumors about the place? "Confounded rumor, boy," said Mr. Miller. "You might be saving that child's life with this medicine." "And I might be losing my own in doing so," the boy replied, and he set the package down on the counter and ran out. It happened that Dan Martin was in the store just then talking with Mary. He heard the conversation and watched the boy leave. Mr. Miller stood there almost quivering with disgust. He started to take off his shop apron and said, "Mary, I'm off to the Wilma's place. You mind the store for me and just do as we always do and close at 6. This was December, and it was already dusk. The sun was a cold rag ball on the splintered western horizon. Dan Martin stepped up and said, "Mr. Miller, here, give it to me. I'll deliver the package. The Wilma's house is that blue house, right?" "Yes," said Mr. Miller. "It's the last house on Small Road. And as soon as you're off Ore Lake Road, it's that house." "You sure you want to do this, Dan?" "Well, I'm not sure," said Dan, "but it's better for me to go than you with your business and all. And if I leave now, I'll be back no later than midnight." And so that's when Dan Martin left. But he didn't return at midnight. And he didn't return at dawn. In fact, he never returned at all. What we do know is that he did reach the Wilma's house sometime around 10 o'clock because he delivered the medicine that saved the Wilma's boy. That baby was Ron Wilma's. His son Ray now owns the dry cleaning shop in Five Lakes. But Dan Martin never returned from his errand that saved Ron Wilma's, and he never returned to Miller's Market, and he never returned to Mary with the dark love knot in her hair. Many years passed. The water table rose, and the rising waters of Ore Lake nibbled away at Ore Lake Road, and they had to close it. No one had traveled that road for a long while anyway. The stories about the creature, the wild man, or the witch persisted. There was a new story about the disappearance of Dan Martin. Mr. Miller took sick a few years after this happened. He died, and dutiful Mary took over the market. She was known like her father for kindness and for her beauty, though they said something seemed to have gone out of her after Dan Martin disappeared. She never married, though it is said she had many offers. Some time later, Mary died when she was in her early 40s, and there was no one left to take over the store. Five Lakes has changed over the years, but not much. The land endures, Ore Lake endures, and has in fact grown. There is still a deep, gnarled, dark forest where Ore Lake Road once lay. Eventually, over the years, the stories about the wild man, the creature, the witch, even about Dan Martin ceased. Things change and go on. What do you do? But sometimes on dark December nights between twilight or as late as midnight, the people that still live along Waverly Road swear they can see a shadowy figure, a big man, walk out of the woods where Ore Lake Road once lay. He walks to the ruins of Miller's Market, which is now abandoned and boarded over, and he walks to the market and looks around as if someone is waiting for him, expecting him. If you go to Ore Lake Road today, you can still find a remnant of the road where John Rumley met the old woman. On the small roadside, the Wilma's house is long gone, There's an orchard and a day spa there now. On Waverly, you can see the old Miller's Market building, washed gray by the years and backed by a tangle of thorns. Be careful if you walk around the building. The thorns are thick and sharp as knives. But above all, don't spend much time pondering Ore Lake Road. You just might wind up writing a story about it. Okay, again, that wasn't a Bigfoot story, and I saved it for last in this set because it's just a good creepy story, and Gerald claims the stories he writes are true, and I don't have any reason to doubt that. But it's just, I don't know what else to say. It's a great story. And you know, people go missing a lot in the woods, and everybody blames it on Bigfoot. Somebody saw a big man in the woods. The legend goes they see him get up and walk around. Maybe it's Bigfoot. So that's why I included it in this set. Hope you guys enjoyed it. All right, thank you for joining me on this podcast. Hope you enjoyed the stories, and we'll be back in just a couple of days with another one. I'm kind of pumped about it. All right, we'll see you guys the next time. Hope you have a good week. See you soon.